Welcome to the special event for the New Yorker Festival. I'm Atul Gawande. I'm a staff writer for the New Yorker on science and medicine. I'm also a surgeon at the Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. But the real special guest tonight is Elizabeth Edwards, a lawyer by training, a mother, someone with great political experience, someone who's made healthcare a major focus of her life, and also, as many of you know, a woman who is in her own fight against breast cancer, very courageous and appreciated, bring both her expertise and her story here today. The topic for us to talk about today is the healthcare. But the great thing about you, Elizabeth Edwards, is that it has never been an abstract idea. And I think the question that's, of course, on all of our minds here today is, how are you doing? And how are you feeling with your own breast cancer?
Actually, I'm doing pretty well. This past week, I had periodically I have scans to see whether there's any progression of the disease, which is located now in my bones. They don't think my lungs, everybody's got little spots in their lungs, but mine haven't changed a bit, so they don't think that's there. Maybe my liver, but they don't really think it's there either, but maybe it is. But they're watching those places. But it hasn't really changed since March of 2007. If you remember, in March of 2007, everyone said I had 5 years to live, and I'm in precisely the same condition I was then. So I figure I have 5 years then, I have 5 years now, and if I can just keep that up, I'll be I'll be America's longest living. I do have to say I had to cancel an event this week that I was going to do in Pittsburgh because I had a stomach virus, and I did find I don't have Google Alerts on myself, but my sister has Google Alerts on me, and she called me and said and the next day I went to pick up some things in High Point, the furniture capital of America, and driving back I was listening to NPR, and Elizabeth Edwards was sick, and that was. I thought it'd really be nice to be able to throw up with not having it on Google Alerts or NPR. But maybe those days are gone for me.
Your story with your breast cancer goes back to 2004, is it?
Yes.
And it really is framed by the campaign, oddly enough, when your husband was the vice presidential nominee, heading right towards the end of that campaign. That was when you first thought there might be something wrong.
I was taking a shower and felt a lump. It felt like the size of a plum in my breast. And I thought, I showered yesterday. Where was this plum? I went and had it checked as soon as I was back in my hometown, which was just a couple of days from then, and discovered that it was likely to be cancerous. The question is what to do about that. And here it was just a few days before the end of the campaign. If I had announced then or done something then, even canceled my events and gone to the hospital, it would have made the news. So, I thought that there isn't, I could just imagine what Bill O'Reilly would do with that, So it just seemed like a better decision, since the doctor said it would not make any difference, not to have anyone suggest that I was pretending I had cancer. There are still people today who think I am pretending to have cancer. So in case you think that's just some loony idea I have. So I just thought it was a better idea for people not to know about it. After the election, there was actually a reason to let people know, and that was because I hadn't gotten mammograms. And I could be now a poster child for what you could allow to happen to yourself. Mine was pretty advanced. It was that plum, and I might have, had I had mammograms, been able to identify it earlier. It had traveled to my lymph nodes, it turned out. Maybe it wouldn't have traveled so far if I had been more vigilant. So we let people know, and actually I found out from people that they were starting to get mammograms. I got lots of mail about that, so it turned out to be advantageous. I think every time somebody comes out and says it is a reminder to people that this can happen to anyone.
Well, this is now just a few days after the election that you did actually see somebody
Yes.
about it. What happens?
At your hospital, I think.
Was it up in my hospital?
Yes.
I've taken patients through this, but what is it like to be on your end when you still don't know what it is. You go to the election, I mean, after the election, you go and get it attended to. How quickly from there to suddenly having to do something about it, and then you found yourself in chemotherapy?
I think because I've read you were very self-deprecating. The story's also this fabulous writer that you described in your books a self-awareness of how patients are receiving information from you. Patients receive information from doctors other than the biopsy says that it is cancer. I'd received information basically, at every step as I was seeing somebody. And maybe the biggest piece of information I received was from the woman behind they first did a mammogram and then an ultrasound. And as they're doing the ultrasound and I'm looking at her face, I know everything I need to know by looking at her face. So I pretty much knew when I left that radiation visit what I was going to find out that from the radiologist. I didn't need the biopsy to tell me what I already knew, and I started to tell my family, that I expected this to be the result.
Is there something that we on the medical side could know that we should do better, even from your own personal experience? Part of it is your experience is one where you're a public figure, everybody is trying to do the right thing, especially hard, probably trying to give you better care sometimes than other people get, and yet I bet you we don't get it right even in that instance.
I do feel like I got celebrity treatment, but some of the ways I did, I think, are actually being adopted for a wide range of patients. I mean, now they have people who are basically walking through the process with you, not necessarily somebody who's a nurse or a doctor, but somebody who is trained and understands what the process is and makes it a little easier to make those transitions. I had that just because of my husband's occupation, but I think it's a really great idea to do that.
Meaning they could walk you through, not just you had a surgeon to see, you had
this is what to expect next, to help you make the appointments and things like that. Do you have? For me, it wasn't a problem, but for some people, do you have some problem with child care? Do you have a way to get here? Make certain that all of those kinds of things.
Well, I have to say, I'm at the Dana-Farber and take care of cancer patients. I can't say I've had someone walking my patients through, making sure their radiation visit doesn't get dropped. Their visit with the oncologist actually happens. It's a good idea.
Yeah, in smaller centers throughout the country, that's sort of the direction they're going. The patient managers, and I think it's a really great idea. Just like you need a medical home with your doctor, when you actually have something complicated like this, it's going to require various moving parts to work together. Usually with an already complicated life, I think it's a really terrific idea. I'd like to say, yes, I knew from the radiology nurse what to expect from the biopsy. But the way to avoid that would be to have a curtain between me and the radiologist, or I was already feeling pretty much alone, so I wouldn't want that. I wouldn't want that kind of isolation. But just to recognize that there are places that people who are worried about their health are so worried about, they're looking at every single possible place to get information, and their caregivers are the first places they look, and they don't necessarily distinguish, you're the fount of all information, but that 98% of the primary care in this country is actually delivered by nurses, and they're a great place to get information about what's happening to you.
So then as you made your way through the system, getting the chemotherapy, scared about what all of this means, did you find the decisions were hard to make, or did you find that actually you felt like there's no real choice? I have to do everything I can, and
I made a decision to try to get the best doctors that I could, and to rely on what they told me. I know nothing about oncology. I had no experience, and the only thing I really did that was two things I did contrary to what doctors said. One, I had a radiologist for my radiation treatment who didn't like the surgical procedure that was being suggested in Boston. And so she was trying to undermine it. She was handing me studies and things like that to try to tell me that I shouldn't have something called a sentinel node, where they just tested one to see whether it had gotten to the place it was most likely to go. And if it hadn't gotten there, you didn't really have to take any others because it probably wasn't the only place else. She didn't think that was a great idea. I did it anyway because that's what my surgeon suggested, and I was following her advice. And the sentinel node had cancer in it, so it didn't matter anyway. Only that time did I sort of shut the door. And the other thing, it was a mistake, I think. When I exercised my own judgment, I thought I was getting celebrity treatment. After all my treatment was over, they wanted to do a bone scan, and I said, you are just doing this because of who I am. There's no way you'd do a bone scan on a normal person. And they didn't argue and say, absolutely we would. And then, of course, it shows up in my bones. So maybe that was a bad decision. The one time I decided to, so I won't be doing that again. The decision, the big decision to make is, it seems to me to be, in whose hands do you place your care? And after you've done that, unless it's something sounds truly wacky to you, I just, or is really an either or, I know you have some discussion of this too in some of your writings, but I think you really have to, it's much easier as a patient to put it all on you, honestly.
Yeah. How long before you felt like you could look out from your own situation again to thinking about what we're doing politically in the country?
Yeah, I've been thinking about it before. In the late summer of 2004, I remember having a town hall meeting. They don't know what to do with spouses' wives, the spouses of candidates exactly. They can't figure out how to use them. So one of the things they would do to me is they'd gather a bunch of people and we'd have a conversation about some issue. And we're having a conversation about health care, actually in Greensboro, North Carolina. Maybe one of the only campaign events we did in North Carolina. But I've talked to these people, and one of the women who was there, I had a lot of healthcare events, but one of the women who was there was an artist whose husband had left her and taken with him her health insurance a couple of months before she discovered she had breast cancer. And that meant she was uninsured and with a disease that was going to cost a lot of money and no place to look. And so she talked about it. She talked about how her community had pulled together, how she had managed through various charities and other things to get the kind of care she needed. But what kind of patchwork answer is that for people who are thrown into this situation? She wasn't like she had enough on her plate, didn't have enough on her plate already, and then this. And talked about these issues all the time. Honestly, I don't think, I don't know how much coverage that event in Greensboro got. You move on to the next place pretty quickly. But as much as I talked, I don't think people paid much attention to me. I didn't have any particular expertise. It's something I cared about. And then I have cancer, and all of a sudden I'm the smartest person on the planet about health care. I think I've thought a lot about it before and since then. And I think what we need is people who are willing to talk about it, think about it, and talk about it, and maybe having some personal experience allows you some additional perspective. But I think the things I talk about, the experiences of other people are more edifying than my own, which was, sort of its own little unique animal.
But in the middle of it, any sickness makes you turn inward, and hard to turn outward to thinking about what the fate of the country might be, or what the policies ought to look like again. How long before you could be going through what you were going through, and then start thinking again about where the country was going, whether it was with healthcare or other issues?
Well, George Bush was just reelected the day before my biopsy, so I was pretty much thinking about where the country was going to go right away. But then I started a procedure that meant I lost my hair, so I sat around thinking about a lot of these things. Actually, I'd be perfectly frank, for the first little bit I turned on HGTV and didn't watch anything else besides things that had to do with redecorating somebody's home or something, and nothing about politics. But it didn't take long before we started thinking about it again and talking about it again. And once I had hair, I started talking about it in public again about what we could do, and deciding that some of the things that we talked about in 2004 were just partial answers to a problem for which partial answers were completely insufficient. And thinking about how it is you go about fixing something that is so huge and involves so many people, not just all the patients and everybody's health across the country, but so many other institutions. I mean, there are institutions you don't even know exist that are part of our health system. You know about hospitals and doctors and again, community health centers and your doctor's offices wherever they're located. You know about all of those ways, all the care providers you pretty pretty clear about. But there are also additional levels too. I mean, you've got the insurance levels, people who are benefits managers, whole industries built around healthcare, and how it is you dismantle the parts you don't need without too much political opposition, save the parts that are working, and don't disrupt it in some huge way that causes an uproar or an insecurity in people's lives. I'll go way off track, which you'll see me do. I grew up in a military family, so I had single payer. Everybody, if you want to go to the doctor, you just go to the doctor. You went to the military doctors. You saw them whenever you needed to. You made appointments if it was more complex. They sent you to a specialist if you needed to go to a specialist. The system worked pretty well. Didn't just work for me. It worked pretty well for John McCain when his dad was in the Navy too. I just want to point out. But single payers being what they are, that means really disrupting that whole system if you're going to have it for the country. And I know that a lot of people truly believe in single payer, and I am not against it. But I do know that when I'm in the middle of my chemotherapy, and I don't know, I've got radiation following that, I've got surgery following that, and radiation following that, and somebody says to me, we're going to change the whole system. I said, no, can you wait a little bit? I need to finish this, then you can do whatever you want. Somebody's always in the middle of that process. Somebody's always going to feel insecure by something that just completely turns the cart upside down. So in thinking about it, you have to think how many people are in that category, and that what you need to do is to find a system where it's, even though you want to have some really huge changes, covering a lot more people and making all the systems a lot more accessible, and making certain that people who are underinsured get what they need, and trying to bring the cost down, all of these things at one time, you still have to make certain that the way that the patient sees what's happening doesn't disrupt their lives. They don't feel like that cart's been overturned. So one of the things when I talk about John McCain's healthcare system a lot, one of the things he wants to do is undo employer benefits. Well, the employer subsidy, the way that the employer-based insurance is subsidized by the federal government, because it's not treated as income to you. And so the way to respond to it is basically to tell people their cart's about to be turned over. That card in their pocket is no good, because that's where the insecurity is. The insecurity for the mass of people in this country is that we don't want our health care upset.
One of the things that makes it, there are many reasons it becomes an impossibly complex topic to even grapple with. And then once you start getting into complexities, makes people's eyes glaze over, is because you're talking about many different problems in the system. What do you think is the central problem that we have to fix about healthcare, or that people are struggling with in healthcare?
Boy, I don't get like three. I only get one. Well, I mean, it's impossible to say.
I mean, is it that we are not providing insurance for people, or security, or is it that healthcare is wrecking our economy, or is it that you start sort of reeling off the list? It's incredibly bureaucratic. It gives you headaches. You can't get the bills paid. Even when you have insurance, you can't count on it. Is there a way that we can describe for people how fundamentally flawed the system turns out to be?
If insurance worked well, both from the perspective of patients or individuals who presently are not patients because they don't have insurance, but if the insurance worked well, both from their perspective and from the doctor's perspective or the healthcare provider's perspective, that would answer some huge percentage of the problems. But it doesn't work particularly well on either side. We have, 47 million people who are uninsured in this country, probably half again as many who at least, and I think that's probably an understatement, but I'm using somebody else's statistics, who are underinsured, and a system that is growing more and more expensive all the time. I like to think that the bailout, the $700 billion answers all of our problems in the market, but it really doesn't answer all of our problems, because half of the foreclosures, if you go down a street and there are 4 houses that are being foreclosed, 2 of them are maybe being foreclosed because those are subprime mortgages that never should have been made in the first place, or they have adjustable rates that have gone have skyrocketed after teaser rates to get them in. But two of them, the other two, that are also depressing the value of your house, are caused by medical expenses. And so, so the pervasiveness of the problem is because things weren't insured, people weren't insured, or they didn't have their exclusions were such that they in their insurance that they weren't covered, or that their co-payments or deductibles might have been, examples of people paying $2,000 a month in co-pays and deductibles. So where's the money for the house payment when you've got $2,000 for those expenses? So if we solve that problem from that perspective, solving it from from the provider's perspective also means that they have a more reliable revenue stream. There's a woman I met campaigning. She had moved to a hospital from Boston, from a hospital in Vancouver. In the hospital in Vancouver, she worked in the accounting office. There were 6 of them. Things moved smoothly. I realize they have a different system, but 6. She moved to a Boston hospital, same number of beds in the hospital, so you'd expect, something remotely close to that. 600 people in the accounting office.
No, I think I have 6 people in my accounting office for just my office.
And so, what we've got is something that, and part of there's a lot of cost shifting that goes along. They end up billing people differently. If you don't have insurance, actually you usually get billed more than if you do have insurance. The insurance company has negotiated a particular price, but if they want to get paid by some charity that's ultimately going to get paid, they're better off building you $2,000 and getting $200 from it from the charity than building you $200 and getting $20 from the charity. So those things, with all those kind of crazy things, of course it's an incredibly expensive system. And do you think the doctors like it any more than we do? They don't. It's incredibly inefficient. They would much rather be using the money that they're using for your accountants for other kinds of staff providing actual medical care to the patients. So the system would work more smoothly if all we did was fix insurance. That's not to say it's all we need to do, but if that's the only thing we did, we would solve a great number of our problems.
Here's the way I tend to think about it, but I also think that because we don't agree on even this fundamental question, that we end up paralyzed. There are arguments about the fact that healthcare is just unfair. And then there are the arguments about the fact that healthcare is wrecking us as a country. And the way I've tended to think about it and talk about it is it's wrecking us as a country, and the unfairness, well, there are a lot of things that are unfair about our systems, but the fact that it's wrecking us is what seems the most disastrous to me. And then you create a different system if you think that's the primary problem. If you think the primary problem is it's unfair, then you want to make sure that, above all, you solve the fairness problem and you deal with the economic disaster of it as a kind of secondary goal. And so we end up, even people who are for fixing healthcare are trying to fix a different problem. And I wonder, do I have that right, or do I have that wrong?
Except that I think that in part, by solving the fairness problem, which is where I start, I start from the other end, I actually think that you end up solving some of the economic problems. I don't think these necessarily have to be at war. You have cost shifting going on at hospitals. My hospital got in a lot of trouble because they charged somebody $50 for a bottle of water. That bottle of water didn't cost $50, but they knew somebody else wasn't going to be able to pay for something. If they charged $50 for that bottle of water, they could recoup some of the costs. So, that's part of the escalating costs are associated with that. So if you identify that you don't have cost shifting, because they don't have to worry about people who are uninsured. If we don't have an example of, which is now, of course, as soon as I started saying that, it slipped my mind. A process that allows us to be governed by what an insurance company wants, what profit they can derive from particular circumstances, turns out to be a system that doesn't work on either basis for fairness or in terms of dollars. Here's an example of this. States regulate how insurance is, what insurers are required to pay. And insurers really lobby to make certain that those regulations are as low as they possibly can be in every state where they can possibly fight them. So what that means is that for diabetes, helping patients pay for diabetes supplies, for testing and for other things that they need to do, for insulin, diabetes supplies, 27 states require that an insurer pay for those. 23 states do not. Is this a good decision for us to make, a good economic decision? I mean, it's a lousy economic decision. It's good today. I'll have more money at the end of in my pocket today if I don't pay for somebody's diabetes supplies. But they can have kidney failure or blindness. They can have a stroke. There are serious consequences from failure to get the kind of treatment you need as a diabetic. But that's what the insurance company doesn't care about that, because it makes two bets. It bets either that you will be with another insurance company by the time you have that consequence, because we move, we change jobs, and we move from company to company. And that's been a pretty good bet for them, or that we die. Or that instead of having those consequences, we just die. That is an immoral bet that they make. And it costs us money in the long run. It's easy to say, yes, in the short run, we do save money, and so if we're worried about that economic issue, we want to make certain that they don't have to pay for those. But if we want to make certain in 10 years that we're making the right decision, you have to pay for those. So, I mean, I think that you can do the fairness issue and the economic issue just as long as you don't look at it today. Look 10 years from now, and I think we'll make the right decisions that'll satisfy both of those things.
When your husband came out with the plan in the presidential election for a universal health care plan, it was at a time when people thought that would be more ambitious than something the country could go for. And I think neither the Clinton nor Obama campaign were really intent on trying to push in that direction Mrs. Clinton, because it would bring up memories that she had to figure out how to fight her way through. In fact, it played to her favor to show she could be for health care. And Obama, because he was still coming to grips with where they stood. But where they ended up standing was on a variant of the Edwards plan. When that plan was being fashioned, first of all, how much a part of that decision-making did you feel you were part of? And how much did you feel that this was a plan that was trying to solve the fairness issue versus trying to make sure that the healthcare system doesn't wreck our economy and wreck wages for people and their ability to have a good economic life as well?
Well, I mean, I was sitting at the table when these discussions took place. It's actually, I think, fairly interesting how it happened, and that was, John said, I want a truly universal plan. I've got these things I want that have to be part of it. It has to be actually universal. It has to cover pre-existing conditions so that we don't have a backdoor way for insurance companies to get out of it. And he'd like to find ways to put pressure on insurance companies to keep their administrative costs down. So how do you fashion plan? And then he basically sat back, and people at the table argued. I have to admit, I argued, and I didn't win out. I would have liked to have seen, and partly because that economic thing just wasn't part of my analysis. We have lots of issues in this country, obviously the balance of trade being one, the manufacturers I was talking to people all the time who'd lost their jobs. They lost their health insurance when they lost their jobs because businesses had moved elsewhere, and you wanted to find some way where we weren't adding $2,000 there's more money in health care than in steel in the automobiles that come out of Detroit. So we wanted to figure out ways to solve that, and so I thought one of the ways you could do it is that instead of the employer provided health care, that the federal government could step in. You have no idea. That makes the bailout look tiny in terms of what it costs to do that. So that turned out really not to be a viable alternative. But what John got was sort of somebody arguing more single-payer kind of analysis, and then somebody else arguing a mix, public with the existing private insurers. He got them both on the phone, and he let them argue with one another. And he listened in. I listened into this conversation too. It's fascinating. So he had two people who really had thought about it, arguing the different things. And every once in a while, he'd ask a question to provoke, so he could flesh out something. But he let them argue it. And then at the end, he said, what happens if we've got the private insurer system, and then we take and add to that system a public provider, a government provider, and you can choose Blue Cross Blue Shield if you want, or you can choose the government plan. And they talked about it for a little while, and they said that would work. He thought it might actually help keep the administrative costs down, as they had to compete with that government provider who is much lower administrative costs. And they saw a lot of benefits to that. And that ended up being the policy, worked out in this, this sort of layered way where you generally talked about what to do, then you allowed some people to frame some options, and then argue in front of him about where to go. And I think he ended in the right place. It's what my view about what would happen with that is that people would be shy of the government provider. It's an unknown, what do you do? Okay, maybe because there's less overhead, you get a little more bang for your buck in terms of insurance, but people might feel insecure, but maybe your neighbor picks it and it turns out to be good for them. So I don't think that in year one, the government provider wipes out Blue Cross Blue Shield. But in year 5, they're in a better position. In year 10, year 20, and so maybe we actually end up moving to single payer, but we move there gradually as individuals make the choice, as opposed to the government making the choice to move to single payer, which means that Harry and Louise are irrelevant because they can't come into each of our houses. Although I put nothing past the insurance industry, they can't come to each of our houses and knock on our door and say, you shouldn't be making this choice, it's a bad choice for you.
The most interesting part of this is it was building off of a plan we have up in Massachusetts that Romney had been an architect for, and then sitting in Massachusetts watching him run away from it was a rather fascinating experience. But I watched my practice, we talked about it a little bit, I watched my practice change. I had about 10% of my patients who are uninsured, and I haven't seen an uninsured patient in 7 or 8 months now.
I wish you would tell the story you told me about the couple, though. Who complained about having to pay this, because you have to pay a certain amount of your income, up to 6% of your income for your health insurance, and so these people reluctantly.
Well, actually, it's the question I want to ask you, and I'll tell that story briefly to make it longer as a question. Because the question that people really raise about the Edwards plan is the idea that mandating that people buy insurance is just not saleable. Maybe it's saleable up in liberal Massachusetts where everybody's a communist, but it's not going to work in the rest of the country. And I saw the dynamic face-to-face with a patient of mine who the husband was a patient, but the wife and husband both came in, and she's a school bus driver, and the school bus system, the school system had made them independent contractors for a long time, and so for 12 years she'd had no health insurance. He is a self-employed carpenter, and he'd had no insurance for 15 years. They are under the 50,000 plus threshold for getting subsidies. So they actually had subsidies for their insurance, but they still had to pay $240 a month, and they were mandated by the law in Massachusetts that you got to buy health insurance. And they were furious. They were furious about being made to pay money that they didn't know how to have for it. $240 a month. They found the ways to scrape it together, and by, gosh darn it, they're going to get something out of this. And the wife made the husband go and get a physical. And they found a large mass growing in his neck, about this big. It turned out to be a cancer that had metastasized to his lymph nodes, but it had been caught just in time before it had gone to the lungs or to the bone. And so we could take out the cancer, take out the lymph nodes, radiate, provide chemotherapy, a big, painful treatment, and give him an 85% chance he'd be cured. I'm positive the law saved his life. He is still, and his wife are still angry about being made to pay this money. And I don't think it's dumb. Getting that $240 a month is really hard. On the other hand, it's capped at 6% of their income. We spend 15% of all of our incomes on health care, so they're getting a big subsidy out of it, and yet it still feels like too much for them. Translate that to the national level, the question people raise is, Americans will not put up with being made to buy this for their own good.
We all pay Social Security, which we do because the government decided it was for our own good. They saw what happened when people were in a situation where they had no nest egg and made the decision that we were all going to have to put something aside. We all hope it's going to be there when the time comes, but we all had to put something aside, and we did it. My guess is the first people who saw that money come out of their paycheck grumbled just like the bus driver and the carpenter did. And now nobody grumbles. I mean, there are people who grumble about the income tax too. But now people have accepted it as a part of their life, and they understand. As a matter of fact, they count on. They're angry if they don't get the benefit, if that benefit's at risk. And I think that, so will there be some period of adjustment where we have people, with their arms and fists up, that they don't want to do this? Yeah, you're going to have that. But at some point, people are going to start to see, and I'm a little surprised they haven't seen it yet, this couple, but seeing that there was, in fact, a value to it. And
I think they find the value in the health care, but the idea that the system forces them to hand over money that's hard to come by for the sake of this, that's the hard part.
But they're paying, what do we pay in
I mean, their family premium was probably $12,000. But their payment for it is going to be, it's actually under $240 a month, so they're paying around $2,500 a year, I think, total is what they pay.
Then John McCain's tax credit's going to work for them.
Let's talk about the McCain alternative here while we have it. So on the one side is a view that if we are going to fix health care, it will involve, even for folks like that, some degree of sacrifice for the sake of the benefit. And I've seen in Massachusetts, we are remarkably closing that gap with the uninsured. But McCain's is a free enterprise idea. It's the idea that we need to have a market-based solution. Those are the words and the philosophy behind that. And your most scathing attack on it has been to point out that neither you nor McCain would be insured, could get insurance under that plan, because it allows insurers to be deregulated. They would not be forced to cover pre-existing conditions. The response of McCain's spokesman was to say, Elizabeth Edwards just doesn't understand the McCain health plan. He said that we have a special trust for the people who might not be covered by the uninsured, by insurers, and that would do the job. Why do you continue to say that they're the ones who don't understand?
Well, we have Thursday night and Ms. Palin's answers on health care as an example of that they don't understand their own health care plan. But what he has done is what Senator McCain did. And honestly, I think he did it in reaction to what I said. When I said neither one of us will be covered, then the following Sunday he's on George Stephanopoulos, I think, and he says, oh, we have a special fund to take care of those people. I mean, he didn't say it off the top of his head. Obviously, they'd worked up an answer. They should have ignored me entirely. They should never have responded to me, because this answer is in terms of free market, is completely contrary to everything that he has been saying, is enormously expensive, and builds on an already inefficient and overly expensive system. In this country, we have high-risk pools. 33 states have them. North Carolina will start in January, become the 34th state with a high-risk pool, which means that you can't get insurance because of your age or your gender, or because you have a pre-existing condition. The cost of insurance just out of sight. Some states require Blue Shield to be that insurer of last resort, but most states have, that's only a small number of states, 10 or so. More states have these high-risk pools. And what they do is various insurers participate, the state helps pay, but the individual has to pay as well. And if you have a pre-existing condition, it can be an extraordinarily expensive kind of insurance as well. It's more expensive than usual, but at least you can get some kind of coverage. The deductibles, the waiting periods, all can be long. I think that under Texas's law, you may have a 12-month waiting period before coverage, which if you've got cancer is really not that helpful. But it's a system that's also really expensive nationwide. We cover about 200,000 people in our high-risk pools in the 33 states at a cost of $2 billion. What Senator McCain is considering doing is, by his change to the employer-based system, throwing 20 million people into the uninsured market, into the free market to buy their own insurance. About a third of them are likely to have pre-existing conditions, and therefore likely to find it difficult to buy insurance. Particularly with the way he's deregulating, which I can also do my little spiel on, which I think is fascinating. But with the way he's deregulating, it's going to mean they don't have to cover pre-existing conditions. They don't have to cover whole range of things. I mean, your pre-existing condition can be that you had a single visit to a psychiatrist after your mother died. That could be enough to send you into the high-risk pool. And then everybody's thrown into a system operated by the government, participated in by private insurers, but operated by the government. This is going to be absolutely mammoth. It's going and has the capacity, if more and more employers drop, to be the largest provider in the country, healthcare provider in the country. We will have single payer. We'll just have it under John McCain, surprisingly enough. And but he's doing it in the most inefficient way, because any insurance works best if it's spread. This is why a mandate's important. If it's spread among us all. If we all buy insurance on our house, so it doesn't burn up, then it's not too expensive. But if we only buy it because our house is currently on fire, how much do you think it's going to cost? I'm on fire. I have cancer already. And so if the only people that are being insured are people who are on fire, it's going to be incredibly expensive. He's found the most expensive possible way to do it and says the government will do just that part of it. Now, it's possible that we could be talking over 10 years about $3 trillion, and this is a really big bite, and I honestly don't think that he knows this. I don't think he appreciates what a huge change this is from the perspective he takes, this free market perspective he takes about things. And he doesn't understand what it's like for people to go out of the individual market. I said we were both Navy juniors. We both went to military hospitals together. Then he went to the Naval Academy, and he was in the military. He makes a joke that he didn't always have military care. There was the time that he was in prison when he didn't, and it's true, and I give him credit for that, but that's really not the issue, is it? That he came back and had the services of the government to provide it, and then he went to Congress, and he's had the federal Employees Health Benefit Program. Not a day has he been out in the market, like so many Americans, and like virtually everybody, if he had his way, would be. He hasn't been there, so it's hard for him to have a perspective on what it's going to be like to go out there. And if you think that if you're covered by your employer, you can go onto one of these websites, punch in your health conditions, and see what kind of coverage you can get. It's a pretty scary prospect to see both how expensive it is and whether you're able to get it at all.
If you think about where we'll be a few months from now, almost regardless of who is elected, there's going to be enormous pressure on healthcare in ways that seem a real change from '92 when President Clinton tried to reform healthcare. In '92, during that effort, and I have to confess I was in the Clinton administration at that time, the employers were waffling on whether this would be good for them or bad for them. Now, the employers want out of the healthcare game. It is making it incredibly hard for them to pay their employees to keep up with the costs of that. And so they are shedding the coverage, and it's increasing at a rate that the pressure is there for Congress to do something. But that said, changing something that's 16% of our economy, we've never changed something larger than 2% of our economy, except in a crisis like we're in right now, and healthcare will not collapse overnight the way we're seeing banking could collapse. And so we do something in surgery when we're about to take on a new operation that we may not have done 1,000 times before, and it's risky. We do what's called the premortem. We ask, what way is this going to fail? And then can we work backwards to head those off? So next year, what way will health reform fail that you could see on the horizon? It's probably a 50-50 chance of passing even under the best of circumstances. So if it goes down, why will it fail?
Well, I wish we could practice on a goat or something beforehand, but we can't. But people have been talking about it. One of the ways that you get it right is by making certain that you have coalitions of employers, of doctors. I don't think doctors have been brought into the process nearly enough, of healthcare providers to be aligned. You certainly have unions and other concerned organizations. So you have a good alliance. On the other side, the alliances are less well formed, really being led by the Association of Healthcare Insurers, the lobbying group, a very expert lobbying group, but a lobbying group for the healthcare insurers, really on the other side of the process, and some Republican opposition. who truly believe that, that deregulation and free market is the way to go.
But on the coalition argument, the people who have something to gain, it's a gain over a long term, and the passion and the fear that drives the people who have something to lose will override the coalition's ability to push forward if there's not a gathering.
I think that was true. I think that there was, it wasn't as organized a coalition in '93, but there certainly were people who felt strongly, but they weren't either as well funded or as committed as the opposition was. I don't think that's the case now. Now the problem is, and I don't want to mislead you, we're ready for this battle and we're fully armed. There isn't total agreement among members of that coalition about what it is it looks like at the end. And so without that, it gets us to the door, but then maybe a lot of infighting takes place for what it looks like in the end. Certainly employers would like to get out of the process. You can't take employers out the first day. It does, it becomes that really expensive thing that I had talked about before. You can't, that simply cannot move. That will result in huge numbers of additional uninsureds. But I think that part of it is making people understand what first can be, kind of in the optimistic viewpoint, and also then what it is they can do to be mobilized on this issue. One of them is, I'm not as optimistic as you that, so now it's March of 2009, and the president is sending a bill to Congress, and we're really ready to go. I think that unless the economic situation changes, we're going to have to explain to a lot of Americans why healthcare has anything to do with our big woes. We lose the planet without global warming. With the bank, our credit industry seizes up, businesses close, we lose jobs, and that's the end of that. And yes, my healthcare is a pain in the neck, but it's just a pain in the neck. So we have to explain its connection to, as I think this study that I cited earlier about how many of the foreclosures, because essentially one of the things that's happened, there are a lot of reasons why we got in the situation we did, but one of the reasons is because these mortgage-backed securities were worth less than the collateral for them, which was the homes, because all those things in foreclosure and the value dropped for the collateral. This is the pressure it put on individuals. A lot of people, for their medical expenses, were using lines of equity. And now, of course, they had no equity. So they ended up in foreclosure or other things, as they had to use their mortgage money for their health care. They couldn't go to their line of credit for it. But so you see the depression in the housing market. We need people to see that it's truly more complex than it is. That's a really hard. One of the places it can fail is that it doesn't get the attention. Not that you don't have a good argument to make, but that we never get any attention. It's like me in 2004 talking to the air. No one's actually listening. I think that there's a real chance that people will not be listening in 2009. And so it's really imperative for us to make the connection and then to appeal to people's better angels, in a sense, and that is, we see the country we want to be, we see where we are, and we see where we want to be. Why is it that we're not just saying, let's just move there? Whatever it takes, let's just move there. You all know better than anybody. After September 11th, the president could have asked anything of us, and we would have done it. Anything. We could have moved away from, people would have turned in their SUVs. He could have called on Detroit to be, we were going to turn on a dime and you all are going to make more fuel-efficient vehicles. Did nothing. And so we're in basically the same situation we were back then in terms of all the things that could have changed. I think that we have the capacity, maybe with great leadership, to say, we're going to do these things, and we're not going to wait to do them, and we're going to ask you to make some sacrifices. You're going to have to pay that $240 a month whether you want to or not, because you're paying it means that there isn't somebody who's uninsured, and we don't have to worry about covering them, and the whole system works more efficiently. And so you're going to have to do something, and maybe it means that for healthcare providers to operate more efficiently, you don't go to the doctor, your appointment is not going to be 3 weeks from now, unless you've got an emergency. It might be 2 months from now instead, because the system is going to try. We're going to try to create a really efficient system, and I think that if we put it in terms of not some leadership, but we are changing the country because we're changing what we're willing to sacrifice to get there. I think American public will respond to it if we get their attention. I think there's a huge case for it. You see it more closely than anybody.
There's a case for it partly that out of the post-war economy from World War II, it's very interesting to see what happened in Britain, where in the wreckage of an economy where it didn't feel like anything could happen, they said, well, along the way, we're also going to make a universal health system. You would not think an economy could do it when it's at the bottom. Right. But that was the moment when they felt, actually, as a country, that it was possible. You're trying to be a voice for that.
I am.
And what are the ways in which you're trying to be a voice? You're an intrepid blogger and have a voice out there that way. You're active in other ways on this particular healthcare issue in trying to make a coalition. Is that right?
I am. I'm participating. I'm a senior fellow with the Center for American Progress, which is one of the participants with SEIU, with Healthcare for America Now, and other organizations to try to keep healthcare on the. Before it was to really to advocate for universal health care, make certain the candidates were in the right places on them, and also to build popular support for an issue that we think already has an enormous amount, but to galvanize it in a sense. Now it's really also to make certain that we don't take our eye off the ball. So I participate in events. I participated in an event this past week in North Carolina. I'm participating in one in Virginia next week, and one in Michigan a few weeks from now, and whatever else it is they ask me to do. They have buses traveling the country making the case as well, particularly in swing states where we hope that the candidates are listening to the voters. Drawing attention to it. My personal opinion, which I don't think is the opinion of any of the coalitions with which, or members of the coalitions with which I work, is that community health centers are a huge part of the ultimate answer, moving them out of stigmatized locations. Somebody who actually worked with we move them out of stigmatized locations. I'd like to see them move into elementary schools, because we put elementary schools where populations live. So if we put community health centers in those same places, we would have them conveniently located for people, and people would actually use them. And we could provide a huge amount of screenings there, which will ultimately, in the 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, we end up saving ourselves lots of money. Anyway, so whenever I have a chance to do an event at a community health center, you want me to do an event for you? Put it at a community health center. I'm more likely to do it there. And so I did one in North Carolina, and it was great. We had people from the center talk about their economic issues, repayment issues. We had doctors there talking about the change in the clientele. So it used to be really, you were talking about this is in Chapel Hill. You were talking about African American immigrant populations largely being served. He said now he's seeing a lot of white 50+ year-old women coming in who've been through a divorce or are widowed, and they found themselves without health insurance for the first time in their life. They come in stunned. They don't know what to do, and they don't know where to go. But the system didn't prepare anybody for their situation. It didn't prepare them, and didn't prepare the system to deal with them. And so they're going to the provider of last resort. I did an event there. It was great. It got some coverage. It's still imperfect. I still want to. I've got a lot of work to do to make certain that my voice gets through about healthcare.
Well, a hard question I warned you we want to ask about is that how are you going to be able to have your voice come through when at this time you're also dealing with a very raw issue that is bombarded at you about the state of your marriage? And in the future, how are you going to be able to get past it and be able to continue to have that voice?
Well, partly by plowing through, like I intend to do with your question as well. Actually, Okay, good housekeeping once said I keep things in my bra. I do. Um, I got this from your book. You were talking about doctors. We are all, whatever we do, in the hands of flawed human beings. The fact is hard to look in the face, but it is inescapable. I don't by any means lead a perfect life. I think that one of the things that makes me able to speak about issues actually is the imperfection and the recognition of the imperfection. And I honestly think it's sort of a great lesson to my children and maybe to people around me that you don't need to. We think of people who speak out as being some, they've learned all this stuff and they've got the ability to talk. I don't have some ability. I mean, I can have a conversation, so can you. And I'm just having it on a stage. And so the ability to speak out doesn't require some particular group of skills. It requires one thing, passion about what you believe in. And that passion has actually been a really great refuge for me. So, I've taken every opportunity I can. I don't just do it when I'm asked by these organizations. I do speeches in lots of circumstances. In various places across the country, I take every opportunity to talk about healthcare. And it doesn't matter what group it is. We do women lawyers in Seattle at the end of next week, and I hope they want to hear about healthcare because they will.
Well, Elizabeth Edwards, I want to thank you for your voice, above all. You're someone who's made healthcare important because it's personal, and also because you understand the connection not just to yourself, but to all of us, that it is an unfair system we have, and that it's also wrecking us. And your willingness to go ahead and keep fighting ahead is an important example for all of us. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, everybody.